Before we begin, let us know where you're listening from. After the story, rate it from 1 to 10. Now let's start. Vienna, 1848. The year Europe trembled. The imperial palace bustled with frantic activity as servants rushed through gilded corridors, arms laden with jewels, gowns, and ceremonial regalia. In her private chambers, Archduchess Francesca Ostrava stood rigid as three ladies-in-waiting adjusted the heavy ermine-trimmed robe across her shoulders. Through the tall windows, she could hear the distant rumble of unrest from the city beyond. "Your Imperial Highness must not frown," whispered Countess Marietta, adjusting a strand of pearls at Francesca's throat. "It will create lines, and today of all days, the people are starving in the streets," Francesca replied, her voice low but firm. "And we prepare for a coronation as if nothing has changed." The ladies exchanged worried glances. At 22, the Archduchess had always been considered eccentric by court standards, educated beyond what was deemed necessary for a woman, concerned with political philosophy, and worst of all, possessing opinions. With her uncle's unexpected death and no male heirs in the direct line, the Habsburg succession had fallen to her, the first woman to inherit the crown in generations. "The Emperor is waiting, Your Imperial Highness," said Baron Clemens, appearing at the doorway with a stiff bow. His wizened face betrayed nothing, but Francesca had known him since childhood and could read the tension in his eyes. "The Emperor is dead, Baron," she replied softly, "and I am not yet crowned. Then I shall amend. The Empire waits, Your Imperial Highness." As they proceeded through the palace, Francesca felt the weight of centuries pressing down upon her shoulders. The portraits of her ancestors, stern-faced men with jutting Habsburg jaws and cold eyes, seemed to judge her from their golden frames. Outside, the February wind howled against the windows, matching the turmoil in her heart. The coronation carriage waited in the inner courtyard, its gold leaf gleaming despite the overcast sky. 8 white horses stamped impatiently, their breath forming clouds in the cold air. Guards in imperial blue stood at attention, their faces impassive under plumed helmets. "Your Imperial Highness," said Baron Clemens, offering his hand to assist her into the carriage. Francesca paused, one foot on the step. Beyond the palace gates, she could hear shouting, not the celebratory cheers of loyal subjects, but the angry cries of revolutionaries. The winds of change that had swept through France were now gusting through the Habsburg territories. "Baron," she said quietly, "what news from Hungary?" His face tightened. "Now is not the time. It is precisely the time." "What news?" "The situation in Budapest grows worse. Kossuth's speeches inflame the people. There is talk of Hungarian independence." Francesca closed her eyes briefly. "In Bohemia? Lombardy, Venetia?" "Similar unrest, Your Imperial Highness." The empire was fracturing along its seams, a patchwork of nations held together by Habsburg force of will, now straining to break free. And they expected her to hold it all together with nothing but a crown and a name. "The ceremony cannot be delayed," insisted the Baron, glancing nervously at the sky. "The cathedral is prepared, the dignitaries assembled." Francesca stepped down from the carriage. "Your Imperial Highness?" Alarm edged into the Baron's voice. "I require a moment alone, Baron." In the chapel, before he could protest, she turned and walked swiftly back into the palace, her ceremonial robes trailing behind her. The small imperial chapel, unlike the grand public spaces, remained silent and empty. Francesca knelt before the altar, staring up at the painted ceiling where Habsburg emperors ascended to heaven among angels and saints. "What would you have me do?" she whispered to her ancestors. The painted figures offered no reply. Her gaze fell upon a side door, a servant's entrance she had discovered as a child during games of hide-and-seek with her cousins. It led to a narrow passage and eventually to the gardens, designed for servants to move unobtrusively through the palace. Francesca rose slowly, decision crystallizing in her mind. She removed the heavy ceremonial robe, folded it carefully on a pew, and unpinned the pearl-studded tiara from her dark hair. Beneath the regalia, she wore a simple white gown, elegant but unadorned. From beneath the altar cloth, she pulled out a modest cloak she had hidden there the previous evening. Evidence of premeditation she hadn't even acknowledged to herself until this moment. The passage was dark and cool. Francesca moved quickly, her heart pounding. She emerged into the palace gardens, navigating paths she knew by heart, until she reached a small postern gate rarely used and guarded by only a single sentry. The young guard's eyes widened in recognition as she approached. "Your Imperial Highness," he stammered, saluting sharply. "I require discretion," Francesca said, summoning every ounce of imperial authority in her voice. "I wish to pray at the Capuchin church before the ceremony. Alone. But your Imperial Highness, protocol requires. Do you question my judgment, soldier?" "No, your Imperial Highness, but..." "Then open the gate." Reluctantly, he complied. As Francesca passed through, she pressed a small gold ring into his hand. "For your loyalty and silence. Until this evening." She didn't look back as she hurried down the narrow street, drawing the hood of her cloak over her head. By the time the alarm was raised, she would be lost in the labyrinthine streets of Vienna, a city she knew only from maps and paintings, having rarely been permitted beyond the palace walls without an entourage. The reality of Vienna struck her immediately. The smell of coal fires, unwashed bodies, and simmering food. The cacophony of vendors' cries, carriage wheels on cobblestones, and heated political discussions from every tavern. Francesca moved through it all like a ghost, both terrified and exhilarated. For the first time in her life, no one was bowing, curtsying, or watching her every move. She had no plan beyond escape, no destination beyond a way. As the sky darkened and snow began to fall, the precariousness of her position became clear. She had little money, no practical experience of the world, and the entire Imperial Guard would soon be searching for her. Near the Danube Canal, she paused in the shadow of a stone bridge, uncertain which way to turn. Nearby, a regiment of soldiers marched in formation, some deployment to manage the unrest, no doubt. As they passed, one soldier at the rear of the column glanced her way, then did a double-take. Francesca's heart stopped. Had she been recognized? The soldier broke formation and approached her. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a face weathered by sun and wind despite his relatively young age, perhaps 25. His uniform marked him as an ordinary infantryman. "Miss," he said quietly, "you shouldn't be alone here. There's been unrest, and after dark." He trailed off, studying her face with growing puzzlement. Francesca pulled her hood closer. "I'm quite all right, soldier. Return to your duties." Instead of obeying, he frowned. "Forgive me, but you're her, aren't you? The Archduchess." Panic surged through her. "I don't know what you're talking about. I was at the palace this morning, part of the honor guard. I saw you through the window." He glanced over his shoulder at his departing unit, then made a decision. "I'm Thomas Steiner. If you're in trouble, I can help." "Why would you help me?" Francesca asked, suspicion edging her voice. "Because something must be terribly wrong for the soon-to-be empress to be hiding under a bridge instead of taking her crown." His voice softened. "And because my mother taught me never to leave someone in need, no matter who they are." From the distance came shouts and the clatter of hooves. Palace guards, no doubt, searching for their missing Archduchess. Francesca made her decision. "Very well, Thomas Steiner. I accept your help." Thomas led her through back alleys and narrow passages, away from the searching guards. "My sister has rooms near the university," he explained. "She's a seamstress. She'll help us, help you, until we figure out what to do." His sister, Anna, was initially shocked when Thomas arrived with a cloaked woman in tow, and more shocked still when she recognized her unexpected guest. But she was practical and kind, and she asked no questions that night as she provided Francesca with simple clothes and a place to sleep. The next morning, Vienna awoke to chaos. Broadsheets announced the Archduchess's disappearance, with some claiming illness, others assassination, and the more radical suggesting she had fled the tyranny of Habsburg rule to join the revolutionaries. Imperial guards went door to door, searching for her. "You can't stay in Vienna," Anna said, setting a simple breakfast before Francesca. "They'll find you eventually." "Where would I go?" Francesca asked. The question wasn't merely practical, it was existential. Without the palace, without the crown, who was she? "Thomas's regiment leaves for Bohemia tomorrow," Anna said. "The situation there is unstable." Thomas, who had slept on the floor of his sister's small sitting room, nodded grimly. "Prague is in ferment. We're being sent to maintain order." "You mean to suppress their desire for self-governance?" Francesca said quietly. Thomas studied her with new interest. Yes, though I didn't expect the Archduchess to see it that way. I've read Rousseau and Locke. I understand the principles of self-determination. Then why? Thomas gestured vaguely, encompassing her flight. Francesca stared into her tea. Understanding principles and having the power to implement them are different matters. I would have been a figurehead, nothing more. The real power lies with the ministers, the generals, the court. They would have used my name to crush these revolutions while I waved from balconies. A heavy silence followed her words. Finally, Anna spoke. Thomas, she could go with you. What? Brother and Archduchess exclaimed simultaneously. Disguised as your cousin, perhaps. A young man from your mother's side of the family, come to join the regiment. She's tall enough, and with her hair cut. Absolutely not. Thomas interrupted. It's too dangerous. More dangerous than staying in Vienna, where every imperial guard knows her face. Anna countered. And where else would she go? She has no papers, no money, no practical experience of the world. Francesca touched her long dark hair thoughtfully. I could do it. Thomas paced the small room. You don't understand what you're proposing. The conditions are harsh, the officers strict. You'd be discovered immediately. I've spent my life observing men at court, Francesca replied. I can mimic their mannerisms. And I'm stronger than I look. I've ridden horses since childhood, fenced with my cousins. This isn't fencing with padded foils, Thomas insisted. This is sleeping on frozen ground, marching until your feet bleed, following orders without question. I've had quite enough of following orders without question, Francesca said firmly. But I understand your concerns. Perhaps Prague itself is the destination, not the regiment. Once there, I could find sanctuary, perhaps with sympathizers to the Bohemian cause. Thomas and Anna exchanged glances, a silent communication between siblings that Francesca, an only child, couldn't interpret. Very well, Thomas finally said. But we do this my way. You follow my instructions exactly. One mistake could mean discovery, and I don't think the army would be kind to a woman posing as a soldier, Archduchess or not. That evening, Anna cut Francesca's waist-length hair to a short style typical of a young man. The heavy dark locks fell to the floor as Francesca watched her imperial identity literally being shorn away. She donned men's clothing, rough wool trousers, a linen shirt, sturdy boots that pinched her feet. Stand straighter, Thomas instructed. No, differently. Not like you're at court. Like you're trying to look taller than you are. He demonstrated, and Francesca imitated him. Better. Now walk. They practiced for hours, how to walk, talk, spit, curse, which made Francesca blush furiously, and handle the basic equipment of a soldier. By midnight, she had the rudimentary movements, though Thomas remained skeptical. You'll need a name, Anna said, carefully burning Francesca's shorn hair in the small stove. Franz, Francesca said without hesitation. Franz Ostman. Keep as much truth in your story as possible, Thomas advised. You're my cousin from my mother's side. You worked as a clerk in Salzburg, but wanted adventure. We're not close, but family is family. At dawn, Franz joined the regiment as they prepared to depart for Bohemia. Thomas had arranged everything. A hasty enlistment through a friendly sergeant who didn't look too closely at the paperwork, a place in his own company where he could keep an eye on her. The journey was more grueling than Francesca had anticipated. They traveled on foot, carrying heavy packs. By the first evening, her shoulders burned, and blisters formed on her heels. She bit her lip until it bled, determined not to show weakness. They camped in a field, the men setting up tents with practiced efficiency, while Francesca fumbled with unfamiliar canvas and ropes. Thomas helped surreptitiously, though he maintained a gruff, cousinly demeanor in public. You need to eat more, he muttered as they sat around the campfire that night. You're too thin for a farm boy. Francesca, Franz, obediently took another helping of the bland stew. Around them, soldiers smoked pipes, played cards, and shared stories from home. It was a world utterly foreign to her, yet strangely compelling in its camaraderie. As the regiment moved through the Austrian countryside toward Bohemia, Francesca gradually adapted to her new identity. She learned to pitch a tent, clean a rifle, though she prayed she'd never have to use it, and march for hours without complaint. The other soldiers accepted Franz as Thomas's quiet, somewhat odd cousin, perhaps a bit simple but harmless enough. Only in rare private moments could they speak openly. During a night watch they shared, standing sentry at the edge of camp, Thomas finally asked the question that had clearly been troubling him. "What will you do when we reach Prague?" Francesca stared into the darkness. "I don't know," she admitted. "I acted on impulse, without a plan. That doesn't sound like the strategic thinking expected of a Habsburg ruler. Perhaps that's why I fled. Perhaps I'm not suited to rule." Thomas was silent for a long moment. "I think," he said finally, "that questioning whether you're suited to rule already makes you more qualified than those who never doubt their right to power." His words warmed her in a way the small campfire couldn't. "You speak treason, soldier," she said, but with a small smile. "I speak the truth as I see it. My father fought in the Napoleonic Wars. He came home with one leg and many opinions about those who send men to die from the safety of palaces. And yet you joined the army. Few options for a poor man's son," Thomas replied simply. "And I believed. I believe in protecting people. I just sometimes wonder if that's what we're really doing." The conversation shifted something between them, an acknowledgement that they were both questioning the roles they'd been assigned by birth and circumstance. As they crossed into Bohemia, the tension in the regiment became palpable. They passed through villages where the inhabitants watched them with undisguised hostility. In Prague, the situation was even more volatile. The regiment was quartered in barracks near Hradčany Castle, tasked with maintaining order in a city seething with revolutionary fervor. Francesca was both fascinated and troubled by what she observed. The Bohemian nationalists, intellectuals, students, workers, spoke passionately of self-determination, of preserving their language and culture. These were the very people she would have been tasked with suppressing had she taken the crown. One evening, Thomas found her sitting alone on the barracks roof, watching the sun set over Prague's spires. "Dangerous thinking spot," he commented, settling beside her. "I needed air. And perspective." She gestured toward the city. "They want freedom from Habsburg rule. Can you blame them?" Thomas sighed. "No, but I'm a soldier. I follow orders, as I was expected to do. Sign the documents, make the speeches, wear the crown, all while others made the real decisions." She turned to face him. "Do you ever wish you could change things?" "Every day," he admitted quietly. "But what can one common soldier do? What can one archduchess do?" she countered. Their eyes met, and in that moment, something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of shared values, shared doubts, shared humanity. Thomas reached out, hesitated, then gently tucked a strand of her growing hair behind her ear. "Your disguise is getting harder to maintain," he murmured. "Thomas," she began, but was interrupted by shouts from below. They scrambled down to find the barracks in chaos. Orders were being shouted, men rushing to arm themselves. "What's happening?" Thomas asked a passing corporal. "Demonstrations in Wenceslas Square turned violent. We're being deployed to control the crowd." Francesca felt the blood drain from her face. "They're sending us against civilians?" "They're sending us against rioters," the corporal corrected, giving Franz a strange look before hurrying away. Thomas gripped her arm. "Stay here. Find a reason, illness, anything. You cannot be part of this." "And you can," she challenged. His face hardened. "I have my orders." "As do I, apparently," she replied, picking up her rifle. The regiment marched into a city in turmoil. In Wenceslas Square, thousands had gathered, waving Bohemian flags and demanding autonomy. The mood was tense but not yet violent, until the imperial forces arrived. Their presence was like a match to tinder. Francesca watched in horror as the situation deteriorated. The commanding officer ordered the crowd to disperse. The crowd responded with jeers and thrown stones. Then came the order Francesca had dreaded. "Prepare to fire." She looked at Thomas, standing rigid in formation beside her. His face was a mask, but she could see the conflict in his eyes. Time seemed to slow. Francesca saw the students at the front of the crowd, their faces young and determined. She saw mothers pulling children to safety, old men removing their hats in defiance. These were not enemies. These were people, her people, if she had taken the crown, asking for dignity and self-determination. As the officer raised his arm to give the firing order, Francesca made her decision. She stepped forward, breaking ranks. "Hold your fire," she shouted, her voice carrying across the square. She dropped her rifle and continued walking forward, into the space between the soldiers and the crowd. "Franz," Thomas's anguished cry came from behind her. The commanding officer spluttered in rage. "Return to your position, soldier." Francesca turned to face the regiment, pulling off her cap and letting her now shoulder-length hair fall free. A murmur ran through both the soldiers and the crowd. "I cannot return to that position," she said clearly. "Just as I could not take the position offered to me 3 weeks ago." She straightened her back, assuming the posture of the Archduchess rather than the soldier. "I am Archduchess Francesca Ostrava, heir to the Habsburg throne." The square fell utterly silent. Then chaos erupted, soldiers whispering in disbelief, civilians shouting questions and accusations. The commanding officer recovered first. "Seize her," he ordered. "This is either a lunatic or a traitor." Several soldiers moved to obey, but Thomas was faster. He rushed to stand beside Francesca, his rifle pointed not at the crowd, but at his own comrades. "She speaks the truth," he called out. "This is the Archduchess. I have been protecting her since Vienna." For a breathless moment, the outcome hung in the balance. Then an elderly man pushed through the crowd, Professor Antonin Palicki, a respected Bohemian historian and nationalist leader whom Francesca recognized from her studies. "If this is indeed the Archduchess," he said in a carrying voice, "then we would hear why she stands with the people rather than on the throne." Francesca turned to address both sides, the soldiers who had been her comrades and the citizens who had been her subjects. "I fled my coronation because I could not in good conscience perpetuate a system that denies the legitimate aspirations of its people. The Habsburg Empire was built in a different age. The future must be built on mutual respect, not dominion." A ripple of reaction passed through the crowd. Surprise, skepticism, hope. "Pretty words," called someone from the crowd. "But why should we believe you? Why reveal yourself now?" "Because I could not watch people die when I might prevent it." She gestured to encompass both sides. "Neither those who serve the empire nor those who challenge it deserve to shed blood over principles that can be resolved through negotiation and compromise." The commanding officer had heard enough. "This is treason," he bellowed. "Arrest her and the deserter." But as soldiers moved to obey, others hesitated, including many who had marched alongside Franz from Vienna. The crowd surged forward protectively, and for a moment, violence seemed inevitable. Then a new voice cut through the tumult, Baron Clemens, appearing at the edge of the square with a contingent of imperial officials. "Stand down," he commanded, and such was the force of habit that the soldiers obeyed. He approached Francesca slowly, his lined face unreadable. "Your Imperial Highness," he said formally, bowing. "You have been greatly missed." "I doubt that, Baron," Francesca replied. "I imagine I caused considerable inconvenience." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Indeed, though your absence has had unexpected consequences." He explained that her flight had thrown the court into disarray. With no clear successor, factions had formed. Meanwhile, revolutionaries across the empire had been emboldened, interpreting her disappearance as tacit support for their cause. The situation had become untenable. "The imperial ministers are now prepared to consider reforms," the Baron said, "including greater autonomy for Bohemia, Hungary, and other regions." "Prepared to consider?" Professor Palicki interjected skeptically. "It is a beginning," Francesca said, "and I will ensure it is more than empty promises. If the people still wish me to take the crown." A complex negotiation followed in the days after what became known as the Wenceslas confrontation. Francesca met with representatives from across the empire, Bohemians, Hungarians, Italians, Poles, listening to grievances long ignored by Vienna. Thomas remained by her side, no longer pretending to be her cousin, but openly acknowledged as her protector and advisor. Their private moments became precious amid the political whirlwind. One evening, walking in the gardens of Hradčany Castle where she was now staying, Thomas finally asked the question that had lingered between them. "When you return to Vienna, to the throne, what becomes of us?" Francesca stopped beside a blooming linden tree. "That depends," she said carefully, "on what you want us to be." Thomas looked away. "I am a common soldier. You are to be empress." "I was a common soldier too, for a time." She took his hand. "In those weeks, I learned more about the empire, about life, than in all my years in the palace. I need that perspective by my side." "The court would never accept it." "The court will accept what their empress decrees," Francesca said with a flash of Habsburg steel. Then, more softly, the empire is changing, Thomas. Why not the rules that govern the heart as well? He searched her face. Are you proposing what I think you're proposing, Your Imperial Highness? I'm proposing that you call me Francesca, she replied, and that you consider a position as imperial consort. Thomas's eyes widened. That's not possible. Many things were thought impossible 3 months ago. She stepped closer. I cannot promise it will be easy, but I can promise it will be worthwhile. Slowly, hesitantly, Thomas raised a hand to cup her cheek. I followed you into battle, he said quietly. I suppose I can follow you into this new revolution as well. Their kiss, beneath the linden tree in the spring twilight, sealed a pact more binding than any imperial decree. In July 1848, Francesca Ostrava was crowned empress in St. Stephen's Cathedral in Vienna. The ceremony differed from tradition in many ways, not least the presence of representatives from all nations within the empire who participated in the coronation as equals rather than subjects. Most shocking to the old guard, however, was the man who stood beside the empress as she took her vows, not a prince or duke, but Thomas Steiner, the common soldier who had protected her during her flight, elevated to prince consort through a special imperial decree. The reforms that followed became known as the Ostrava Compromise, establishing a federal system that granted significant autonomy to the various regions while maintaining the symbolic unity of the Habsburg crown. It was not a perfect solution, no political arrangement ever is, but it prevented the empire's violent dissolution and laid the groundwork for a more equitable future. In private, the empress and her consort maintained the simple habits they had formed during their journey. They rose early, walked without ceremony through the palace gardens, and kept their quarters more modest than imperial tradition dictated. Thomas never lost his soldiers' directness, which served as a valuable counterbalance to the court's tendency toward flattery and intrigue. On the first anniversary of her flight, Francesca found Thomas in their private library, reading reports from Bohemia. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked, settling beside him. "Helping the strange woman under the bridge." He smiled, the lines around his eyes crinkling. "Best decision I ever made, though I didn't know it at the time. And now? The court whispers still, you know, about the empress who fled her coronation only to return with a common soldier as her consort." Thomas set aside his papers and took her hands. "Let them whisper. History will tell a different story, of an empress who had the courage to change an empire, and perhaps more importantly, her own destiny." "Our destiny," she corrected, leaning her head against his shoulder as the spring sun streamed through the imperial windows, illuminating a future neither of them could have imagined on that snowy evening beneath a Vienna bridge.